So, good evening. I'm Ken Jacobson, and on behalf of the Kemp Holocaust Committee and the sponsoring shuls, which are Young Israel Shomrai Emunah and Kemp Synagogue, I welcome you to this year's virtual commemoration of Kristallnacht, the Night of the Broken Glass, which occurred on this very date in 1938. Kristallnacht was a Nazi orchestrated pogrom across Germany, Austria, and parts of the Czech Republic to terrorize the Jewish population in their homes and synagogues. Tens of thousands were arrested, hundreds of synagogues burnt to the ground, and about 100 people killed. This was after years of vilification and rising persecution of Jews, even before Hitler took power in 1933, but which accelerated following the racist Nuremberg laws in 1935. The Nazis claimed Kristallnacht was a spontaneous reaction to the assassination of a German diplomat in Paris by a young Jewish refugee named Herschel Greenspan. But that was only a pretense. They later made the Jewish communities pay for all the damage of Kristallnacht throughout Germany. And it was a turning point of anti-Semitism in Europe. Hitler was aiming to physically destroy the Jews and could not be trusted with appeasement or tamed, as was promoted by the British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain. Before we hear the speaker, it's my pleasure to introduce Rabbi David Rosenbaum, the Moreh d'Asra of Young Israel Shomrai Emunah, to give his thoughts on this occasion.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ken. Thank you to the entire committee. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. Certainly welcome to Rabbi Weinberg of KMS, and we thank KMS very much for their participation and partnership in this very special community program. And of course, welcome and thank you to Mr. Cohn. We read in yesterday's Torah reading of the famous story of Akedas Yitzchak, of Abraham being ready to sacrifice his son Isaac. And of course, the angel stops him before he does it, and he relays a blessing from God. And the verse says that Hashem, God, will bless Abraham, and I'll make your offspring great in number, and your offspring will inherit the gate of their enemies. What exactly is meant by that last phrase? Offspring will inherit the gate of your enemies. Surely there's many thoughts, but I saw this year a very interesting idea from the Meshech Chochmah. The Meshech Chochmah explains that Abraham was ready to do an act that would normally be considered an act of cruelty. He didn't end up doing the act. God stopped him, but he was ready to do it because and only because God instructed him to do it. How would that impact Abraham as a person? He did this, he was ready to do this act of cruelty. Will this make him a less kind, compassionate person moving forward? And the message, says the Meshech Chochmah, is that God is telling Abraham, because you were doing something that objectively would be considered cruel, but you were doing it with pure intentions and doing it because it's my will, I'll make sure that your character is not impacted by it. And then God relates that there will be future times in your nation's experiences that sometimes they'll be in a situation where they have to fight against their enemies. And in the fight against their enemies, you would think that to fight, even to wage war, might make people less compassionate, less kind. And the assurance that God gives Abraham and the merit of being ready to sacrifice his own son is that when his offspring do things for good reason and with good intentions, and when right is on their side, they won't be negatively impacted. Their characters won't be negatively impacted. I think it's a very powerful thing to think about in light of current events. There are so many of our brothers and sisters in Israel who literally have risked and continue to risk life and limb just to keep the Jewish people safe, and to think of this blessing that as long as their intentions are correct and they're doing the right thing, they'll still be the great people that they were before they embarked on these dangerous missions. And I think it's powerful to think about in the context of Kristallnacht, to think about how that we do have enemies in this world. We have had terrible enemies in this world, and we will have enemies in this world. And specifically, it's uniquely inspiring. We'll hear the story, but Mr. Cohn was someone who experienced the terrors of Kristallnacht and was able to fight back down the road. And I'm confident that we'll be able to say and see for ourselves that despite having to fight, it was a good fight that he fought, and that he still is a person of tremendous character, following in the footsteps of Abraham and so many others who came after him. That sometimes we as Jews have to do things that we don't want to do because this is what's right. Thank you very much, and I'm sure we'll all be inspired tonight.
Thank you, Rabbi Rosenbaum. So tonight, we're privileged to hear from a speaker who lived through horrors in Nazi Germany. He lived in the eastern part of Germany. If you see on the screen now, there's a map showing the city of Breslau, where he lived from his birth in 1925 through just days before Kristallnacht. Breslau is now in Poland. He will share with us vivid memory of his experiences in Germany and later in the United States, including his service as a high-ranking officer and official of the US Army. Frank Cohn is a Holocaust survivor, World War II veteran, and retired US Army colonel. He resides in the Washington area, following a long and decorated Army career. His wife of 72 years, sadly, passed away 4 years ago. His daughter Laura lives in Florida. So he eventually sought refuge in the United States, and you'll hear his amazing story about how that happened, and that saved the life of his entire family. He also fought in the Battle of the Bulge in Belgium at the end of 1944, and subsequently helped apprehend and prosecute high-value Nazis as a member of Army intelligence. His knowledge of German, which he still maintains, has served the U.S. well. So, Frank, it's a privilege to welcome you to our Kemp Mill community, and we are eager to hear from you. So, as you know, we're going to show a few slides, and I'd like you to address some of the images in the slides. So now let's go to the first slide. So on the left, we see your parents. Can you tell us about your early life with your parents? Where did they come from? What did they do for a living? Please.
Well, thank you very much. And just to start, Kristallnacht had a very big role in my life, a very big one, and I'll get to that after a while. But here you see my parents, and they are in Breslau at the time. They had worked in, and they were born in an area of Posen before World War One. And when World War One came out and finished, the area of Posen became Polish, and they didn't know Polish, so they both came to Breslau, and that's where they met. And my father, and this was right after the great inflation that came there, where a piece of bread cost about 1,000,000 marks or so. Well, anyway, my father had a sporting goods store, and this gave us a very good income, and we were very comfortable. Of course, the store was open before I ever was born, but when I finally recognized things, I did go to that store, and I saw it when I was about 6 or 7 years old. And This was at Hitler's time, and as soon as Hitler came to power, there were demonstrations in front of the store by Nazi troopers, and my father understood that this was going to be a very losing proposition because the poster says, "Don't buy from Jews." And of course, the population was very much afraid to go into the store when you had stormtroopers in front of that place. Now, the other picture here is the new synagogue, and that was a more of a reform temple. My parents were a little more religious, and they were in a different synagogue, which wasn't that grandiose. And we had to walk about a half an hour from our house to get to our synagogue because we didn't take the streetcar on the Sabbath. And when the Nazis came in, you really didn't want to be picked out as a Jew in the street. So my father took all the paraphernalia and placed them in a briefcase that he carried. And we walked like that to the synagogue. And I always remember to this day the caution that I got. It was behave, 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 because we're not going to have any attention placed on us in case you're making some sort of a disturbance and an argument or anything of that sort. And that stuck in my head all through my life. Well, anyway, as soon as the store was sold, my father got a pretty good price for it still, and we were able to use the money and cast along until about 1938 when we had to make a big change.
Yeah, so there were many conspiracy theories about Jews circulating in Germany, and here is one image of one of the more famous and insidious ones, the stab in the back story. Can you tell us anything about that?
Yes, Germany, of course, lost World War One, and there was always uh, an urge to find out why was it that they lost the war, and in order to do that, there were always some persons and some organizations that could be blamed. And while the communists and the socialists were blamed, so were the Jews. That the Jews were working with the Allies instead of with Germany, and that they should have been prosecuted as traitors and such, and they helped lose the war. And of course, this was help in getting that anti-Semitism worked up, and it was worked up very well. In my family, it was as back as 1927 that one of my uncles was killed on the streets of Chemnitz, which was a different city that we were in. But he was accosted by the Nazis in uniform, and when they confirmed that he was a Jew, they killed him at that point. Now, I was still too young to understand anything, but the process of trying to prosecute the people responsible, and at that time, under the Weimar Republic, there was still a government thrust to prosecute people who killed Jews. So I heard that, when the adults were talking about it. They weren't talking to me, but they were talking about each other. And a kid overhears these things and forms his own opinions. And my opinion came very clearly that Nazis were dangerous people and that Nazis were never going to be my friends. They were in fact the enemy.
Okay. So the next slide on the left shows one of those signs you were alluding to: don't buy from Jews and don't believe their propaganda. So can you tell us, what did it feel like as a kid seeing such horrible things in big signs on the street?
Yeah, well, I started school in 1932, and my first grade teacher, I can't remember much about him. He was old. He was about 50. But my second class teacher was a young, energetic fella, and I liked him very much, and I thought he really liked me too. And when I heard that he was coming in to take over our third grade class as well, I was all excited, and I was waiting for him to come in. And when he came in full Nazi uniform, as you can see him in the middle of that picture. And pretty soon, all the kids in the class started to join the Hitler Youth, and you can see many of them had paraphernalia on, either a shirt or a cap or a belt, because they were part of the Hitler Youth. Others were not, but I was the only Jewish kid in the class. You can see me in that circle thing. Um, that's me in the third grade. So everybody started to have to sing the Nazi songs, the Horst Wessel song, for example, which was in honor of a Nazi that was killed in some way. But everybody stood up to sing those songs except me. I was told to stay seated. And the kid who's seated, when everybody stands up, is not going to be very popular. So I was an outcast in the class. But Herr Schubert, the teacher, I will say this: he wanted to keep order in the class, and he did not permit anybody to pick on me. But after class, I was picked on, and I was thrown many curse words at me. And then one time, I could see they were going to try to beat me up, and I took off running, and they chased me. But I was a pretty good runner, and I got home in time to be saved. And I told my parents what had happened, and they transferred to me then from the German public school to a Jewish private school. And I was again very comfortable in that class. And that was a boys and girls class. But I had not much contact with girls. I didn't know what to do with them. I was scared of them in a way. But that's life.
So the next slide, we talk about what happened after the Nuremberg laws. Can you please tell us what happened to your German maid?
Yes. The Nuremberg laws came out in 1935. And what essentially it did was separate the Jews from the Aryans being the Germans. So now my parents had, after they sold the store, decided to sell bales of cloth to people who used these bales of cloth, like tailors and other people who made various clothings. And at 1935, they lost all the German customers because they were not to go to a Jewish store or a Jewish a person who was selling bales of cloth. And then, of course, on the Jewish side, they were losing customers too because the Jews disappeared. They took off fleeing to various countries. And where you see me here, this was close to 1938, just before my bar mitzvah. And I'm playing with one of my friends there, Peter. And on the other picture, this was the house where we had an apartment. And we used to stick out the German flag. But then pretty soon the German flags were outnumbered by the Nazi flags. And after a while, we didn't display our flag anymore. It all was a separation in many respects. Well, the big problem was, of course, that my father could not take care of the family anymore. He didn't have enough income as he was losing all the customers. So right after my bar mitzvah, he came to me and he said, Frank, well, actually, my name at that point was Franz, but I don't tell people that. Anyway, he said to me that we have to do something else, and I'm going to get a visitor's visa to go to the States where we had distant relatives, and I will ask them to get me an affidavit. An affidavit is an invitation to immigrate, but it has one proviso, and that is that the person who receives the affidavit will never become a burden to the government. And with that, that means the person who issues the affidavit, they have to have enough money to support the person that gets it. Now, he found the relatives, but he wrote us back that they didn't have enough money to provide him with the affidavit because of the economic conditions in the States at that time. It was during the Depression time. So he had to stay longer to see if he could find somebody to give him an affidavit. And while he thought this was a very difficult thing and an unfortunate thing, it was a very fortunate thing, because had he come back, he would have met the two Gestapo agents that came to our door looking for him. And my mother said that he was on an international trip, and she was instructed that the minute he came back, he had to report to Gestapo headquarters. Now, that raised real red lights in her brain, because she remembered a business acquaintance of theirs. His name was Mercedes, and he had been told to report to Gestapo headquarters, and a few hours later, they found him dead on the sidewalk in front of the headquarters. He had either jumped or been pushed out of a third-story window. And she immediately wrote my father to stay where he was because he would get arrested if he came home. And about 4 or 5 days later, a British lady came to our door with an official document that said we had to provide her with a bedroom in our apartment. And my mother took me aside and said, this lady is a Gestapo informant. So if we have anything to say that's important, we have to go for a walk someplace outside. I understood that. And well, the lady was really British. And actually, she seemed very nice to me because she gave me 2 English lessons. And I never realized how important they were going to be in the future at that point. But I got those lessons. And a few weeks later, my mother turned to me and said, "Oh, let's go for a walk." And I knew immediately this was going to be important. And we got outside. She turned to me and said, "Should we go?" And I understood immediately what she meant. Should we take off and meet my father in New York and flee from Germany? Now, this was not an easy question for me because all my friends were in Breslau, and I had a very nice school arrangement in the private Jewish school, and I liked the people that I was in my class, and my cousins were there, and I was on a soccer team, and I had a good position. So a lot of things that pulled me to stay in Germany. But the smartest thing I ever did in my entire life was I said, "Let's go," because I knew we were not wanted in that country and that the Nazis were our enemy. And with that, my mother went to the consulate in Breslau, and she got a visitor visa in her passport, and completely out of character, she went the next day and bribed somebody to place me on that visa as well, which was easily done because, as you see that passport right there, I was on her passport, which said "Ensign Franz." And the visa just was annotated with son, so the visa encompassed me. Now, you could always do all kinds of things before you leave, and she made arrangement for first class passage on a Holland America Line trip, boat called the Stadtdamm, and she made hotel reservations in New York on a first class basis because we had to leave everything behind. As a visitor leaving Germany, you could only take 1 suitcase and 10 marks. And of course, 10 marks wouldn't do anything that was less than $10. And we were at the mercy of the Jewish relief organizations as soon as we were out of the country. But we took the railroad to, we snuck out at 5 in the morning so that this Mrs. Griffith wouldn't hear us. And we got on a train and went to Berlin, where she said goodbye to her father, my grandfather. And of course, she didn't know it, but he died just a few weeks later in a concentration camp. And then she said goodbye to her oldest sister, and she was not going to see her anymore either because the sister had made arrangements to emigrate to Australia. And of course, we didn't have the money to go there, and they didn't have the money to visit us. So she never saw her sister again. So in any event, we went from Berlin to Amsterdam and said goodbye to her cousin. Josephsons were their name, mother and father, and a boy my age. Now, of course, this was not a good place to escape to in Belgium. And when the war started, they ended up immediately in a concentration camp. And it was a miracle that the two parents survived. But the kid was with another 100 kids on a field in the cold, and they didn't feed them, and they didn't clothe them properly, and one after another died from exposure and hunger. And so did that boy uh, die. My cousin died that way. In any event, I had a very enjoyable trip on that boat in the first class, and I almost was a ping pong champion, but at the last minute somebody beat me, so I wasn't. But my mother had a terrible trip because she was kept worrying about what would happen in Ellis Island when we hit New York, because Ellis Island was the place that all people going into the country were assembled to check them out. And if they were to find out that my father was already in country, they would know we were not visitors, we were refugees. And the United States didn't want any refugees, no Jewish refugees either, even though they were escaping from a bad situation. We would have been kicked back to go back to Germany, and goodness knows what that could have happened with the apartment abandoned to the Gestapo informant. Well, in any event, I had gotten from the gym teacher instructions that when you hit New York, you get in front of the boat and you take pictures of the skyscrapers and the Statue of Liberty. And he explained what the statue was all about. And I was there with my box camera and I took my pictures. And the announcement came over the system that said, all first class passengers are invited to go through customs and directly onto the dock. We did not have to go to Ellis Island. Money talks. It's amazing. But anyway, we had a very wonderful reunion with my father as we got off the boat. And but he said we weren't completely out of danger yet, because he was instructed by the Jewish relief organizations who were going to provide us as well as him the enough money to subsist in New York, because as a visitor you had no authority to work. And my parents were always very law abiding, so they would exactly do what they were told in that respect. And they were told that if you got the affidavit, you got to go back to Germany and wait for the invitation to emigrate to the United States. Well, that just wasn't going to work. And here's where the Kristallnacht came in. Well, we had ended up in New York on the 30th of October, 1938, completely by accident. That was the date that we came in. 10 days later, November 9th, was Kristallnacht. And of course, that was splashed all over the papers all over the world. And we read about it and we were horrified. All our relatives that had not emigrated yet were still in there, and what would happen to them. And we didn't get any notification at that point. Everything was in a mishmash. But President Roosevelt, who read the papers like everybody else, issued an executive order that said nobody was going to be forced to return to Germany if they were in country. And that meant that our visas were extended indefinitely and we were saved. So the horror of Kristallnacht ended up on a personal basis to save us.
Yes.
Well, anyway, I was in the seventh grade when I left, and I got put into the seventh grade here in the United States. And yeah, I might say we lived happily ever after.
So what was it like learning English and getting suddenly in an environment where you could hardly understand what people were saying?
That's a very good question. It was a real difficult situation. When they put me in the seventh grade, they actually put me in the rapid seventh grade because I had been advanced in math and in geography and history and all these subjects except for English. English was the problem. And I knew it was a bad problem right on the first day. I was in my class, and the teacher wanted to get me acquainted with all the other students. So she said, Frank, and by the name, by the way, my name changed the minute we came into the country from France to Frank. Uh, just one letter got switched around, and I was Frank from forever after. Anyway, she said, Frank, take the waste paper basket around and collect the trash. I had no idea what she was talking about. But she had looked at the window and I thought, she wants me to open the window. So I go and I open the window. And of course, everybody laughs. Kid who's told to go pick up the trash ends up opening the window. So I ended up an outcast again. But it wasn't a vicious thing. It's just the kid who doesn't speak English isn't going to be a friend of anybody. So I had made my mind up. I got to learn English real quick. And things were not quite that easy, but I was helped. The teachers provided me with magazines where they annotated items displayed on pictures as to what the name is of it. And that went a little way, but not much. And then the radio. Now, the radio was difficult because I couldn't understand what the heck it was all about that they were talking about. But I got the intonations of the English language, and I practiced that, and I was able to avoid the heavy German accent that I didn't want right from the beginning. And the one that thing really helped me learn was the movies, because in the movies you could see what was going on and you could understand it a little bit that way as to what they were saying. And that is really what taught me English well. And but it was 10 cents per movie. 10 cents now sounds like a big deal. But it was a big deal in a way because we were at the mercy of the relief organizations, and 10 cents was a lot of money. But luck was with me. Somebody knew Time magazine and introduced me to them to get into a movie, a newsreel that was shown before every movie. They had this newsreel. And in the newsreel, at one point, they wanted to replicate what was going on in Germany. So they staged, as if it was in Germany, a blackboard with writing that said something to the effect that Jews are our horror, and they are the ones who cause us all kinds of problems. And there were going to be two Jewish kids, one staying on one side and the other on the other side of the blackboard with their heads hung high, low. And that was about a 10-minute deal. And I got $100 for that. Somebody was trying to help some Jewish refugee it. But the $100 sure gave me a lot of movies for 10 cents. So I earned the way to teach me English on my own.
Wonderful. So how did your father finally get permission to work here, and what did he do?
Yes, eventually he did get the permission, uh, and but by then I had been drafted into the United States Army. Um, as as I was drafted into the Army 1 month after my 18th birthday. I was 18 in August of 1943, and in the Army a month later. And well, let me go into that first. I went to Fort Dix, New Jersey, which was a reception center. And usually people stay there about 4 days, and they get processed in for the days. And on the fourth day, they have orders to go to basic training. Everybody got orders to basic training who came in with me, except me. So I went to my sergeant, and I still remember his name. His name was Sergeant Shomrai. He was a American Indian. I said, Sergeant Shomrai, how come I didn't get orders? He said, well, let me check. Came back, said, it's obvious. You didn't get orders because you're an enemy alien. I said, I'm an enemy alien? Yeah, you're an enemy alien. You were born in Germany. You came over with a German passport. You were never naturalized when you got here. So as far as the United States is concerned, you were German, and the Germans are the enemy, so you're an enemy alien, and the FBI has to investigate you. But I'm Jewish. He said, it doesn't make any difference. You're German. Well, it was bad enough to get the name of enemy alien on me, but I also remembered that on the second day, they had put me on KP, which is kitchen police. They wake you up at 4 in the morning, and you're in that kitchen until about 8 o'clock at night. And it's not a wonderful arrangement. And I thought, oh my goodness, am I going to be on permanent KP while they investigate me? I went back to Sergeant Shomrai. I said, Sergeant Shomrai, I want to tell you, I'm not completely strange about the military. I had been in high school ROTC, and I had an ROTC course in college in that one summer term that I took before I was drafted. And I know the terminology. I know the close order drills. I know the tactics. I know the history and all that kind of stuff. And he said, I'm glad you told me. I'll make you an acting gadget. What's an acting gadget? He said, don't let it go to your head, but here is a armband with corporal stripes. You put that on, but remember, you're not a corporal. You're just a temporary corporal. And when those new recruits come in, you being a seasoned veteran of 4 days of active duty, you form them up and you march them to the theater to see the 2 films that you saw on the second day when you came in. I said, oh, wonderful, I can do that. And the new recruits came in, I formed them up, I gave them instructions, and we started marching up 2, 3, 4, up 2, 3, 4, right, left, to the theater. Wonderful. And then we saw these 2 movies. The first one was Why We Fight, which was a very good movie explaining why we were in the war. And the second one was How to Avoid Venereal Diseases. I saw that movie more than anybody else in the United States Army. Well, anyway, 3 months went on, and I finally got orders to basic training. which meant the FBI had cleared me. And I went to Fort Benning, Georgia, and about 3 weeks after I arrived, they said, get in a Jeep, and they took me into Columbus, Georgia, to the federal district court there, and I was sworn in as a U.S. citizen. Boy, was I proud. I got rid of that moniker of enemy alien. I patted myself on the back because nobody else was there to do that. But I now was just as good as everybody else. I was an American, just like all the others in my unit. And this was just wonderful. Well, after basic training, they needed infantry, and I went off to the 87th Division in Fort Jackson, South Carolina for advanced infantry training. And there were a number of things why, but I ended up having leaving the division as an infantry replacement. And as an infantry replacement, I went through England and then to France and then into Belgium. And in Belgium, they suddenly found out that I spoke German. So they needed German speakers more than they needed infantry. And off I went back to Le Vessinay near Paris for a 2-week course to become an intelligence agent. This was a abbreviated course taken from a course of about 8 weeks or more in Camp Ritchie, Maryland. And the people who went to Camp Ritchie were called the Ritchie Boys, and they were mostly refugees like me or others who had learned German and had spoken German fluently. They went to Ritchie, and after their training, they became intelligence agents. Now here, I was on this 2-week course, and it was even worse than that because after 1 week, they needed me so badly, they took me out, but I was a full trained intelligence agent and now worn only US, and took my PFC stripes off. So nobody knew my rank. And I joined the team composed of 2 officers, 2 interpreters, a driver, and a non-commissioned officer. Well, the driver and non-commissioned officer had to wear their ranks, but we didn't. Now, the driver never knew what my rank was, but he was really outranking me by 1 grade, but he didn't know that, so I always ordered him around. Well, anyway, we took off. This was Interrogator Prisoner of War Team, IPW Team number 66, and we went to Luxembourg, where we married up with a big intelligence unit called T-Force, Task Force, 12th Army Group, right under General Bradley. The way the structure was, there was General Eisenhower, and under him was Bradley and Montgomery, the British guy. So we were high up in the chain, and this intelligence unit had the mission to go into the big German cities as they were captured, and there we had personality targets and building targets. Building targets were anything that could be of value by the U.S. forces and anything that had governmental or Nazi authority type of activities associated with it, and anything that could be used in the prosecution of war criminals. And of course, the personality targets were the war criminals. So we went back into Belgium, and we were waiting for the infantry to move into Belgium. But instead of that, the Battle of the Bulge broke out. And here you see the Battle of the Bulge, because it was just miserable. Not so much because of the attack by the Germans, but because of the weather. The weather was just a horror. It was either sleeting, freezing rain, or snowing, and you got cold and you never got warm, and if your feet got wet, they remained wet, and worse than that, we had to run around Belgium in an open Jeep with the windshield down, because you can't shoot through a windshield. So even going 25 miles an hour, the blast was just murderous, the cold blast as you're driving. Now, I was the low-ranking one, so I was in the back seat of the Jeep, but that was still better than in the front. I got behind the captain, and the captain got the worst of the blast, and he shielded me a little bit from that blast. I never told him that, of course, but I profited just a little bit, but I was still miserable, believe me. I can remember, I remember that forever. Oh, every time I take a bath, a nice warm bath, I remember the Battle of the Bulge, because we didn't get any baths at that time. We had to wait till the Bulge was over and we could go to Liège and get rest and recuperation, which included a shower. By the way, the first time I was in there for 20 minutes and people were yelling, "Get the heck out of there." I wouldn't move. I took that warm water and I wouldn't move. Well, anyway,
So two more
we
stories.
got into a situation on the first day that was real frightening. Again, not because of the fire of any enemies, but because of that weather. And they placed me on an access road coming into our headquarters with the carbine and flashlight and instructions: don't let any Germans come in. That was it. Here I was. I got in the middle of the road. The first vehicle came in, and I'm yelling, "Halt, halt, halt." So he stops and he yells, "What the hell you doing?" I said, "I'm making sure you're not a German." He said, "Well, if we were German, you'd be dead. Get in the ditch over there." I thought that was pretty good advice. I got into the ditch. Next vehicle came. I'm yelling, "Halt, halt, halt." Don't hear me. Go right by. I'm not doing my job. So now I don't know. Should I be up? Should I be down? What am I supposed to do? Never got any instructions from anybody. And the rumors were terrible. They were shooting all over the place in the distance, although there was nothing to shoot at, because they had these rumors about paratroopers, German paratroopers, being all around us and such. None of it was true. Well, finally at midnight, they relieved me for a blackout move towards Antwerp. And what we didn't know was Antwerp was really the target of the Germans in that bulge. They wanted to get to the port of Antwerp and cut that supply line off that way. But neither the Germans nor us ever got to Antwerp. We got to Namur, and in Namur we got orders to circulate throughout Belgium to see if we could intercept Germans that had infiltrated through our lines in American uniforms, 4 to a Jeep. And, well, the problem of circulating through Belgium seems like not so difficult, but because of the weather, it was absolute horror. Well, anyway, it lasted about 7 days, and we never ourselves intercepted. But when we got to Dinant, we found an infantry roadblock had encountered one of these German infiltrators, and they didn't know the password. And in their conversation, they recognized that these were the Germans, and they wiped them out with a bazooka. So we searched the dead Germans, the four of them that were on the ground in the snow, and the Jeep had been overturned by the bazooka blast. And the only thing we found on them was dog tags and explosives and maps, but nothing much of intelligence value except for the dog tags. We turned those in because they were either captured or dead Americans. Well, anyway,
So
7
what
days
about
later, it was near Christmas, and the planes came over, and we cheered them because that was going to change the bell way. And the whole thing was going to be turned around, and it did.
what about the time you were briefly held prisoner by the US Army?
I was hoping not to tell the story, but things don't always go according to Hoyle. Now, here we were going through Belgium, and we could see the captain didn't know where we were because he was looking at the map. He was looking around, looking at the map, and it's not healthy to be not knowing where you are because you could stumble into the front lines and end up on the wrong side of the front line very easily. Well, so we were just passing an American unit that had been deployed on a little hillside, and we asked the captain to stop to check where we are. And he was very reluctant to do it, but he finally agreed. And he told me to come with him. And the two of us trudged up the hill, and there was a lieutenant who had drug a table out of a farmhouse, and on the table he had maps. And in this miserable weather, we still had the maps out. And all he had to do was ask the lieutenant to show him where we were. But he didn't want to admit that he was lost, so he goes up to the lieutenant and said, Captain Rempel, military intelligence, give me a briefing of the situation. The lieutenant looked him up and down and wasn't very impressed. He said, wait a second. We just got word about Germans who had penetrated our lines before in uniform, and you guys look just like it. And so, of course, we're not German, we're Americans. He said, okay, what's the 5th General Order? Well, there were 12 general orders that every soldier had memorized. And had he asked me, I could have come up with it. Captain didn't know. So, okay, who won the World Series? Captain looked at me. I looked at the captain. I didn't know. He didn't know. We had other things to think about than the World Series. I said, okay, Star Spangled Banner. Captain starts reciting, oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light, gets stuck. He's not singing it. Well, more and more people had started to come around, and down on the bottom, the other interpreter came running up, but he was a staff sergeant, and he was a little older than me. He was about 26 years old. I was still 19. Anyway, he had a terrible German accent. He obviously hadn't listened to the radio like I did. Anyway, he comes in and said, "What goes on here?" That's all that was needed. The rifle was in my belly. A rifle was in the captain's belly. a rifle was in Flo's belly, and they ran down and got the driver. We were now prisoners of war of the Americans. It took them 7 hours. We sitting out in the cold with that stuff coming down at us. Just misery, misery, misery. And when they interrogated me, I had to admit that I was born in Germany, and that sure didn't help. Well, anyway, it took them 7 hours before they could verify themselves that we were really Americans. And the lieutenant said, "Get the hell out of here."
Yeah.
The captain got us
Fortunately.
and said, "Don't let anybody tell about what had happened." "No, sir, we won't tell." But the minute we got to the command post, they came running out and were yelling, "Hey, what goes on here?" They had heard the whole story as they were trying to get a verification that we were legitimate. And we never lived that one down.
Okay, so I'm going to show one more slide, which represents your long and distinguished Army career. So we salute you for your service and
Well,
thank
thank
you
you very
for your
much.
service.
Now, as we went along, we went into these various cities. We're running out of time, aren't we?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let me quickly do it. We went through Cologne and then to Düsseldorf and Siegen and Frankfurt. And then we were to go to Magdeburg, but we got change of orders to go immediately to Magdeburg from instead of Kassel to Magdeburg because the Russians had already arrived at the Elbe. The Elbe was the river that President Eisenhower, well, at that time, General Eisenhower had dedicated, as designated as the dividing line of us going eastward and the Russians going westward, so the two armies wouldn't intermingle. And when we got there, the captain got orders and a top secret map that showed the occupation zones. And the occupation zones showed that Magdeburg and areas all the way down towns that were in the Soviet sector. So the Russians were going to come across. But his order was to go across and talk to the Russians to tell them to wait until we withdraw a few weeks later, and then they could take their occupation. Anyway, looks for a Russian speaker, can't find them, but turns to me and said, "You're my interpreter, come with me." I said, "I only know one word in Russia, I'm trying to get out of it." Said, "No, I don't care." Tovarish was the word, friend, comrade. But
So,
anyway,
yeah.
we went across, and you can't imagine the reception we received. They hugged us, they kissed us, they carried us around, and they tried to ply me with vodka. I'm 19 years old, and I have vodka in my life. One sip, and I knew I better stay away from that stuff. But anyway, I was of no use to the captain. They took him in the back, but they got him an interpreter. He came back an hour later, and he was all happy. And we went back and told about it. And it wasn't until 3 weeks later that one morning I woke up and I understood why we had gotten such a reception. It was because when the Germans attacked the Russians through Poland and got into Russia, they mistreated the Russians terribly. So when the tide of battle turned and the Russians started to move westward, the Germans didn't want to get taken prisoner by the Russians because the Russians were taking their revenge. So they fought hard every minute of the way. So they had to fight all the way up to the Elbe. We, as we were driving up towards Magdeburg, knew the war was over for us because on both sides there were German soldiers coming towards us with their hands up, trying to surrender because they were hungry, but we had to wave them off. But the war was over for us. But here, when the captain finally got a boatman, a German, to take us across, and he got up in the middle of the river to make sure they see it's an American. When we got there, we got that reception, and I could now understand that when they finally saw an American in uniform, they knew there were no more Germans in front of them, and they had survived the war, and they were celebrating their survival.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for telling your many aspects of your story of surviving Nazis and fighting Nazis later. It's such a compelling story.
Yeah.
So now I'm going to go into the chat and see if there are any specific questions. If you have any questions, please type them into the chat. So while we're waiting,
Well, there was, of course, a story at every city, but I
Yeah.
I had to cut this short. But
well,
the
we'll
irony, of course, was that here was a Jewish, young Jewish refugee, and the Germans really loved me because I spoke German, not because I was Jewish, but I spoke German. They could understand me, and I had gotten three more after the war. I became an officer. I was discharged as a staff sergeant, and I was in the reserve, and then became an officer at my graduation. And I got married, and we went three more times for three tours into Germany. And on the last one, the irony was they gave me a big decoration from the German government, the big service cross, like the Legion of Merit.
great. So one comment was thank you so much. You're a great inspiration for us. Another question was which of your family members perished? You already told us about a few, but tell us more.
Well, I had 11 pretty close family members who perished in the Holocaust. My grandfather was among them. The others were uncles, aunts, and cousins. And there was a total of 11, 6 of them from my father's side and 5 from my mother's side, which just disappeared because we don't know exactly how and where, but they were all killed in concentration camps.
Right. So somebody wants to know, how did you get all those wonderful pictures that we showed in the slides? Did you bring them with
Oh, the
you from
pictures.
Germany? Yes.
I had a small album that I took along in that one suitcase that I was allowed to take, and they were really very, very few pictures. And
Okay.
you actually probably saw most of them.
Yes. Another question is, when you went to Germany, I guess in the army as an intelligence officer, how did it feel? Was it emotionally difficult to go back to the place that almost killed you?
Well, of course, it was a completely different situation. I had been a refugee, uh, and I had been uh, in jeopardy when I was in Germany, and nobody loved me from the German side. Uh, and here now I was in charge. I was no longer a refugee. I was in charge, and I felt very good at that. But as part of that, I also said I was never going to be like them. I was not going to take my revenge. I was going to do everything according to the rules that had been laid out. and I followed that to a T. And then, of course, when we got to when I got to be, well, first of all, during the war, uh, I didn't have my name, so they didn't know who I was. After the war, we wore name tags, and the Germans could see my name, Cohn, and that obviously meant that I was Jewish, so they knew who they were dealing with. But I never had one bit of official prejudice or discrimination or anti-Semitism thrown at me. They were always very, very polite. Of course, in the beginning, they were afraid, and later on, uh, they recognized that the anti-Semitism had led to some horrors, and they didn't want to associate themselves with that. So they were always very correct with me. And as I said before, they loved me because I spoke German. And I never admitted to them that I was born in Germany. My story was I was born in the United States by parents who had come from Germany, and we had spoken German at home, and that's how I learned the German. Now, whether they believe me or not, I couldn't have cared. That was my story, and I stuck with it.
Can you tell us how you met your wife?
Oh, sure. Uh, I was in high school, and she was in junior high school. And the junior high school was right across, the back entrance at least was right across diagonally from where I lived in New York City, Manhattan. And I got a friend of mine who also was a refugee. He came from Austria. And we went into the after school recreation, and we challenged a couple of girls there to play ping pong. And as I said before, I had no exposure to girls. I didn't really know what to do with them. But we challenged them to ping pong, and one was called ping, and the other one was called pong. I liked pong, and I found out her name was Paula. And I even got the nerve to take her out to the movie and such. But then I was drafted, and I I never know why, because I could have written to her, but I never did. I never wrote to her while I was in the Army. Then when I came back to CCNY, she had caught up with me, and we were both in CCNY at the same time, and we reestablished contact, and she she forgave me that I didn't write, even though that was still thrown at me to the end of the day. But well, it became serious, and then I had been liked as a taking her out for a date and such in her family. Everybody liked me until they found out that I was going to end up being an officer in the United States Army, and that I had ideas about marrying her, and I became persona non grata. So I couldn't go and pick her up anymore at her house. She had to sneak out, and she snuck out. Well, she didn't sneak out. She went to buy the newspaper every evening, and I was always waiting for her. So we had about 5 minutes, but that wasn't going to be uh, for forever. This was a terrible situation. So I said we ought to get married, and she was resisting that until finally she agreed, and we were going to elope. So we got together on one fine day, and I invited a couple of my friends. The one who played ping pong with me was one of them, and then another one, and and he brought his girlfriend along. So there were 5 of us, and we took off in the subway to go to Judge Ringel. He was my commanding officer in the reserve, and I just made sure that he was there. And we got there, and Judge Ringel was surprised. He knew I was coming. He said, "What are all these people?" I said, "I'm trying to get married, and I want you to marry us." He said, "Frank, I'm sorry. While they call me a judge, I'm a magistrate, and a magistrate doesn't have jurisdiction to marry." Good grief.
Okay.
Paula said, "Well, let's go home." I said, "No, no, no." We got to a cafeteria, and I got into the phone booth, and I found a rabbi in Queens who was willing to marry us. So the 5 of us took off to the rabbi in Queens, and I had my $2 to do that, and we were married. But now, where was we were going to go? We didn't have any place to go because there was a housing shortage. I couldn't find a place where we could be, so we had to go separately to each of our parents and not say anything. And it took me 3 weeks before I finally found a place. It was a terrible place. It was a 1-bedroom with some kitchenette, and we had to share the bathroom with somebody else. And that's where we finally went. And of course, my mother was sorry that she wasn't included, but I couldn't include her when Paula's mother couldn't be included. Paula's mother really blew up, and it took her 24 hours before she came to our house, and all was forgiven.
Okay, wonderful. Wonderful.
Ever after.
Yes, thank you for ending on that very happy note. So I really want to thank you once again, Frank, for this fascinating and memorable program. Everybody loved it. I can see from the messages coming in and applause and hearts. And I think you've got enough material for a book. So we'll be looking forward if you want to write
And
write
as
a book.
I said, I got a story for every place where we
That's
went.
right. That's right. And
Yeah.
let me also thank the 2 sponsoring shuls, Young Israel, Shomrai Emunah, Kemp Synagogue, Rabbi Rosenbaum, Rabbi Weinberg, Lori Voigt from Vital Signs for the captioning, and all Debbie Katz, who helped organize this program, and all the members of the Holocaust Committee. So thank you, and a big applause for you, Frank, and have a good night.
Let me applaud everybody who came and listened to me. Thank you very much, and I enjoyed it.
Good night, everyone.
Bye-bye.